She's often referred to as the first Louisiana woman to make significant achievements as a sculptor, from the iconic Bienville statue on the edge of the New Orleans French Quarter, to the La Belle Augustine statue of her family's maid, to reliefs on the Louisiana State Capitol. Angela Gregory has left a legacy chiseled in stone.
The Gregory, located inside the historic Watermark Baton Rouge Hotel, is honored to support Angela Gregory, a legacy chiseled in stone. Lunch or dinner dining is available daily among murals sculpted by Angela Gregory in the 1940s.
Angela Gregory was a 20th century Louisiana sculptor who lived in New Orleans, but made an impression across the world because of what she produced and the teaching that she was part of, both in terms of how she was educated, where she was educated, and how she eventually taught full-time at a university. Born in 1903, and she died in 1990, Angela had the perfect parents for what she ended up doing. Her mother was one of the original Newcomb painters of Newcomb pottery. Her mother created the first postcard that was ever used in the South of a woman selling pralines. Her father was a hydrology engineer.
Angela's mother was also her first formal art teacher. She taught art at the Catherine Bress School, which Angela attended before following in her mother's footsteps to go to Newcomb College.
Angela's father, as a hydrologist, was sent to Paris when World War I ended to restore water. Prior to that, he had received a letter from Angel. That's what her family called her, was Angel. And Angel explained to him that she had decided what she would do, and it was to be an artist who worked with stone. Then, as he goes from one place, one city, one village, restoring water, he goes to find postcards from those towns and writes, "My dearest Angel," and to read how this father responds to his daughter, encouraging her, and on the reverse side of what he's saying are images of sculpture and art that come from those French cities and towns. My goodness, the education that she got from her father's postcards.
Following in her mother's footsteps to go to Newcomb College, where, like her mother, she was taught by William and Ellsworth Woodward. The Woodward brothers are considered among the most influential artists in the South in the first half of the 20th century. They were from Massachusetts and came to New Orleans and brought with them a level of sophistication and a knowledge of art historical trends and styles that was unrivaled at that time. They were very supportive of Angela's intention to become a sculptor. And even though Newcomb did not have any sculpture classes, and Ellsworth, who was in charge of the school, was a painter, he taught her as much as he could about sculpture and really encouraged her talent. He gave her a magazine article one day about the sculptor Antoine Bourdelle and said, "If you want to learn how to cut stone, this is the artist whom you should be studying under." Now, Bourdelle, Antoine Bourdelle, was Rodin's lead technician. And when you think of Rodin, think of The Thinker, which is probably his most famous work. One of Bourdelle's most famous works actually was at the New Orleans Museum of Art collection for many years at the front of the building on the steps. Today, it's in the Sidney Waldo Bestoff Sculpture Garden next door to the museum in City Park. It's called Hercules the Archer. When Angela graduated from Newcomb, she of course wanted to figure out, how can I get to Paris? Her parents were of a middle-class background, and to travel to France was very expensive. She came across a scholarship to attend what is now called the Paris branch of the Parsons School of Design. The scholarship was to study illustrative advertising, which really wasn't Angela's desire, but it gave her the opportunity to get to Paris and to be there for 9 months.
She was now in Paris. Angela Gregory, young 23-year-old woman from New Orleans, knocks on an aquamarine door of Bourdelle's house connected to his studio. The maid answers the door, and Angela says, as she introduces herself, that she really wanted to study with Bourdelle. And could she talk to him or to Mrs. Bourdelle, who was also a sculptor? The maid says to her, "They are not here now," and sees the crestfallen look on Angela's face and hands her the phone number of the Bourdelles and said, "Call Mrs. Bourdelle and speak with her. She is the one who is the door to meeting with her husband." And so Angela gets the courage and indeed calls Madame Bourdelle and said, "I understand who you are and where you're coming from and what you want to do. Could you meet with me at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but you can't stay more than 30 minutes. So she comes in and she meets with the Bourdelles and explains what she wants to do, why she wants to learn with him. And she was admitted. That 30 minutes extended into 2 years of a residency within the studio of Antoine Bourdelle, seeing how the studio worked with visitors coming, understanding how the teaching was done, how his assistants worked with him, and what she learned from them. That is indeed where she learns to cut stone. The first step was choose something you want to copy. And so she chose the head of Christ from a 14th century cathedral, the Beauvais head of Christ. And she then purchased a block of granite, and the whole process began of her copying a model and taking away. Sculpture from a stone is about taking away to reveal the very piece. And so she learns to cut that stone and produces that head of Christ. Her mother had told her the story of hearing the stone cutters chiseling the angels on the original Newcomb Chapel. And the fact that there's a sound the chisel makes against the stone when you are cutting it correctly. And so her tools then came from that. The things that she actually cut from stone are perhaps 2 or 3. The first is the Beauvais head of Christ. The second is the head of Asclepius that is on the Tulane Medical School in New Orleans. Her first piece of sculpture beyond sculpting the Beauvais head of Christ, because things were then poured in bronze molds, was a little goose. And the goose is the symbol here at the Gregory restaurant. And she created that while she was in Paris in the 20s studying with Bourdelle. She was in a park sketching the geese. A plane came into Paris. Angela was in Paris when Lindbergh flew into Paris, and the sound of an airplane startled the geese. She drew the geese and then decided she was going to make it her first piece of bronze. So she takes it to be cast at a foundry in Paris. And who purchased that first piece? Tiffany's of Paris. When you read in her journals that when she saw what Tiffany's paid it for, she says, note to self, you should have charged more.
Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Robin Merrick, supporter and friend of LPB. You're watching Angela Gregory, A Legacy Chiseled in Stone. What a trailblazing artist Angela Gregory was. We are honored to share her story with you and celebrate her legacy in this new LPB documentary. You have the opportunity right now to help LPB produce more stories about great Louisianians through your renewed or new membership. Simply give us a call right now or text GIVE to 888-769-5000. You can pledge online at lpb.org or scan the QR code on your screen with your smart device. You may choose to make a one-time gift, or you may prefer to become a sustaining member with a monthly donation in an amount that you decide. So when you call during this program, you can choose thank you gifts that we have selected especially for you in association with this documentary. Let's find out about them right now.
For $15 a month, receive the Angela Gregory combo, including a DVD of the program you are watching, Angela Gregory, A Legacy Chiseled in Stone. The hardcover book, A Dream and a Chisel, Louisiana Sculptor Angela Gregory in Paris, signed by author Nancy Penrose, plus the book Newcomb Pottery, a visual treasury book. For $10 a month, receive the book A Dream and a Chisel, Louisiana Sculptor Angela Gregory in Paris, signed by Nancy Penrose. Or for just $6 a month, receive a DVD of the program you are watching, Angela Gregory, A Legacy Chiseled in Stone. In addition to these wonderful gifts, you'll receive Visions, LPB's monthly program guide, Louisiana Life magazine, and our popular member benefit, LPB Passport.
And we're back with some great co-hosts joining me today. We've got James Fox-Smith, glad to have you here.
Lovely to see
Country
you,
Roads Magazine in place, and Miss Chelsea Norris, co-director at Ann Connolly Fine Art. Welcome to you both. Welcome to the LPB studios and this great documentary that we're watching this afternoon.
I'm so excited about it. Angela Gregory is not someone that I initially knew of until a project we worked on at the Watermark, and so it's been really fun kind of getting to know her story and as a trailblazing young woman, and how we could bring it into like a modern context, because the story is timeless.
It is. It was really fascinating for me, and I know, James, with the work that you do here with Art Rocks, this had to be, and the story that you wrote in Country Roads can just really expand on Angela and her work.
That's right, Robin, because Angela, in the course of her time as an active woman, artist, working in stone in Louisiana in the 1930s, you put all those things together, that's a pretty rare combination.
That's pretty revolutionary, trailblazing,
exactly,
to say the least.
And yet she left a mark everywhere in pieces that are still very much part of the Louisiana built landscape now. And that's something that this documentary spreads out and then gives an opportunity to share.
I can imagine when everyone's watching it, they're going to immediately identify with these pieces and say, oh my gosh, I had no idea who did this work. And then to know that it was, like you said, a woman in the 1930s really leading the way to make all of this happen. So, you know, we're thankful for LPB and all that they're doing to make this happen. And one of the ways that you can support us is through our credit card offer. And James, you've got some more information on that.
I do. So if you choose to support LPB today at the $1,500 level, you receive a set of 2 limited edition prints of Angela Gregory's original sketches. These are the sketches that were made in preparation for her bronze sculpture, Plantation Madonna. It's a list of prints that is authorized and was reproduced from the Gregory's originals by a trustee of her estate. There will also be, at that level, an after-hours private curator-led tour for up to 10 guests of the exhibition Angela Gregory, Doyenne of Louisiana Sculpture, as well as the other exhibitions currently on view at the West Baton Rouge Museum, right over in Port Allen. There's also a one-night stay for 2 in the Watermark Baton Rouge, plus a $100 gift certificate to dine at the Gregory, the Watermark's restaurant, at which you would take place right underneath some of Gregory's original works. So it's an incredible opportunity.
It is. This is, get your credit cards out is basically what we're saying. Get your credit cards out, because this is the time to do that and show your support for LPB and get some great thank yous in the way of all of this. Now, in addition to our credit card offer, Chelsea, we've got this amazing member challenge going on.
Amazing member challenge. Frank and Kathy MacArthur, they're proud to support LPB's Louisiana Production Fund and are challenging all viewers to donate tonight and will match dollar for dollar up to $5,000 called in during this program only. In effect, this will make your donation worth twice as much to LPB and will help us produce more documentaries that celebrates Louisiana's food, art, music, scenery, cultures, and traditions, all things that you love and all things that make our state a treasure to the world. Pledge now to become a founding member of LPB's production fund.
I love this production fund. I can't wait to see all the things that are going to happen for it. So we want to hear from you. 888-769-5000 is the number to call. And here's more on our thank you gifts that you can receive when you make that call and that pledge of support to Louisiana Public Broadcasting.
For $15 a month, receive the Angela Gregory combo, including a DVD of the program you are watching, Angela Gregory, A Legacy Chiseled in Stone. The hardcover book, A Dream and a Chisel, Louisiana sculptor Angela Gregory in Paris, signed by author Nancy Penrose, plus the book Newcomb Pottery, a visual treasury book. For $10 a month, receive the book A Dream and a Chisel, Louisiana sculptor Angela Gregory in Paris, signed by Nancy Penrose. Or for just $6 a month, receive a DVD of the program you are watching, Angela Gregory, A Legacy Chiseled in Stone. In addition to these wonderful gifts, you'll receive Visions, LPB's monthly program guide, Louisiana Life magazine, and our popular member benefit, LPB Passport.
You know, Louisiana is so honored to have LPB to tell its stories. And that's one of the big missions here, not just public television in general and all the things that we do on public television, but what happens in terms of telling Louisiana's story. And James, you're there with Art Rocks. I know we talked about Country Roads, but everybody really knows him from Art Rocks. And that's Louisiana stories as well.
Such an opportunity that LPB has given me to tell some of the stories of Louisiana artists through the context of Art Rocks and the ability to tie, because artists are the ones that help to interpret the landscape, the culture of the place and of the state in ways that allow us to see it through other people's eyes, I think. And there was nobody as profoundly impactful as Angela Gregory and the students that she taught in really tying those stories together. And I think that's what LPB exists to do, and that's why this kind of programming is so important.
That's right. The work that we do here is so important, and it's so important that you support LPB. And we want to talk more about that support, even as it relates to, we've got the member challenge going on. So you want to tell us about that one more time before we go? Member challenge and credit card offers and all of that, because we want you to call and make your pledge of support at 888-769-5000.
Yeah, there is no, I mean, supporting LPB is a truly creative enterprise. I mean, it's more than just, let's give you some money and go on your way. You are helping to put these stories together, and you do that by, you give a $1,500 pledge during this program, and you receive these 2 limited edition prints of Angela Gregory's sketches. You receive an after-hours private curator tour of the exhibit at West Baton Rouge Museum of Angela Gregory, doyen of Louisiana sculpture, and that night at the Watermark, dining at the Gregory, surrounded by Angela Gregory's own sculptured works. So what an opportunity to tie all of those things together and really make the connections real for yourself.
And the challenge is another great opportunity. Really excited about that. So Frank and Kathy MacArthur of Baton Rouge, they're supporting this amazing challenge for the Louisiana Production Fund for LPB. They're challenging all of our viewers to donate tonight, and they'll match dollar for dollar up to $5,000 during this program only. So it's kind of a limited opportunity. So this money helps us to produce more documentaries that celebrate kind of the culture, the art, the scenery, the culinary arts, and traditions, all things that make us a treasure.
That's right.
All the way around.
All the way around. And on that note, I'm going to encourage you to keep watching and supporting LPB, and we'll be back a little later.
Angela Gregory returned from Paris in the summer to the heat of August in New Orleans. And she thinks, why on earth did I leave that coolness? So she had to get back to what she had learned. And so the first thing she did was to sketch her mother's maid, Augustine. She drew that and then put it in plaster, and on a return trip to Paris, casts Belle Augustine that bust in bronze.
Her most significant work, according to the artist, was Belle Augustine. In fact, Angela later stated that it was Belle Augustine that really started off her career.
The engineering department of Tulane saw that, and they had someone who was going to retire. So here was the man who had all the keys to all the doors in the engineering building. Angela's father was an engineering professor. So they said, could your daughter do a bust at the retirement then of George Lewis? And indeed, that is exactly what she did. That piece is held by the Tulane Museum. The third piece that she does, she had gone with her parents to visit friends in the Delta of Mississippi, and she sketched the children, the mother who had a nursing baby and the dog sitting all around. That became the Plantation Madonna. She's the one who then named it the Negro Project and looked for national funding to be able to actually draw and sculpt the images of the beauty of these people that were so much a part of life in the South.
Angela Gregory came into her own as a sculptor towards the end of what's called the Art Deco period. Art Deco architecture was characterized by the embellishment of sculpture both on the outside as well as the inside of the building. So at the time that Angela returned from Paris and these new buildings were about to be built, Angela was a prime candidate to be invited to produce the sculpture for these Art Deco buildings.
As an architectural sculptor, which is what she was always working with engineers and with architects. The dimensions were quite exact in how they fit with a door frame or a spear or a spire, exactly that. And when you look at her initial experiences of exactly what that very first building, the criminal court building of New Orleans, you might consider and look at the very stone pieces that you see on the building, realize that an initial piece is usually conceived in clay, then in plaster, and a mold made to turn it into bronze, or from that plaster piece, or from that clay piece that has dried, stone cutters use very exacting tools to give the exact measurements. A great example of how that was done is to realize Angela did 8 of the 22 profiles that are at the 4th floor level on the outside of the Louisiana State Capitol. The artists who did all 22 of those were all sculptors from New Orleans. Angela had first pick, and she chose the 8 that she wanted to do. But they were very tight measurements. Even the depth of the relief was specified. And so she had to follow that particular thing. She did not physically cut the stones that are on the state capitol. She created the models that were out of plaster. 7 out of 8 of those models are now in the museum at West Baton Rouge.
Angela was of French descent, and she had family both in Port Allen and also in Opelousas. So when St. Landry Parish decided to build a new courthouse in 1938, she was the obvious person to invite to produce this commission. For this project, Angela decided to honor St. Landry Parish by producing a mural that included emblems related to the produce and products that came out of St. Landry Parish, such as cotton, sugar. On one side of the building, there's an Acadian woman sitting at a spinning wheel, and on the other side is a hunter who is in a rice field.
Angela worked in conjunction with Caroline Duryea in the whole Federal Arts Project. That's when she got the commission to do McDonough.
Among Angela's favored formats was the portrait bust, which is a head and shoulders style that became popular during the Greek and Roman period and was picked up again in the 19th century. Artists such as Bourdelle, for instance, her teacher, made a large number of portrait busts. Angela didn't only make busts or monuments of important historical people, she also really enjoyed doing portraits of friends and family members and just people that she knew, whether it was a portrait bust of her father, William Benjamin Gregory, or the porter at Tulane University.
Do not make mundane confessions. Don't let somebody tell you how to create a piece of sculpture or paint a picture or do anything else. I tried to keep that as my motto.
Angela's father died in 1945. She gets this commission to do the Bienville Monument in the 50s. The Bienville Monument was a piece that was created for and by 3 countries, Canada, France, and the United States, specifically Louisiana. It was a French colony and a French location. Bienville was one of the 2 brothers that came from Canada, worked with the Indians to figure out what was at Mobile.
Angela started out thinking it would just be a statue of Bienville. She tried different poses, standing, holding things, seated around a fountain. So she has small models where she tried these different poses, but eventually she decided she wanted to tell a larger story. She also wanted a particular look. She kind of wanted a 3D walk around. So she added 2 other figures, a priest that had been on the expedition with him, for a French priest, and then a Native American who we believe is symbolic of the Bayou Gula Indians. It's approximately a 1/3 size model, and that's the one she took with her to Paris.
These are specifically of the making of the Bienville Monument, which started out with a scale model of 1.25 inches in height and ended up 24 feet high to get an appreciation of the great scale of a monument.
The Bienville that stands at the edge of the French Quarter was cast in Paris.
She rode on the boat there with the model, and then she rode back, brought the model back, and of course the end result, the huge statues that had to be created and brought onto this transatlantic liner going from all the way from Paris back to New Orleans. She didn't just create a statue based on one portrait that she saw of Bienville. She looked up as many poses that she possibly could. She had somebody do research on the priest that came on this expedition and even pose with a replica of the type of habit that he would have worn. She did extensive research on the Native Americans that they came into contact with and the kinds of clothing and headdresses and everything that they would have had too. So this was really a labor of love for her.
Hello, I'm Robin Merrick, friend of LPB. Welcome back into our LPB studios during this broadcast of Angela Gregory, A Legacy Chiseled in Stone. If you love watching stories about the important figures in Louisiana history, tell us so with your call right now. It's an easy process to support your public television here in Louisiana. Simply call or text GIVE to 888-769-5000. Become a member online at lpb.org or scan the QR code that is on your screen with your smart device. You will want to do that during this program because we have a special member challenge you will hear about in just a moment. So, also, because LPB truly does have the best thank you gifts for our members, let's take another look at the gifts associated with this program right now.
For $15 a month, receive the Angela Gregory combo, including a DVD of the program you are watching, Angela Gregory, A Legacy Chiseled in Stone. The hardcover book, A Dream and a Chisel, Louisiana sculptor Angela Gregory in Paris, signed by author Nancy Penrose. Plus the book Newcomb Pottery, a visual treasury book. For $10 a month, receive the book A Dream and a Chisel, Louisiana sculptor Angela Gregory in Paris, signed by Nancy Penrose. Or for just $6 a month, receive a DVD of the program you are watching, Angela Gregory, A Legacy Chiseled in Stone. In addition to these wonderful gifts, you'll receive Visions, LPB's monthly program guide, Louisiana Life magazine, and our popular member benefit, LPB Passport.
And we are back with some great guests in our studio today. With us is James Fox-Smith, Country Roads Magazine, our publisher.
Robin.
Thank you for being back with us. And Chelsea Norris, Ann Connolly Fine Art. You're the co-director there, so thank you again for being here. And we are just really enjoying this program. I cannot tell you how much we're enjoying it. We're just chatting about it off and on about all the things that we're seeing. And the work that Ann Connolly does here in the Baton Rouge community, really uplifting Miss Gregory's work throughout the city and the state. Tell us more about that.
So right, Robin. I mean, really, she has such an amazing legacy, and the West Baton Rouge Museum, what they're doing to feature her work is really just an exceptional way to add on to this kind of layering effect with what LPB is doing, with what the Watermark property does to uplift the work in a modern context. And so really just that symbolism behind the work and where she was in Louisiana at the time, being a young woman working in stone. I mean, it's really just something that it's so enriching to learn about, especially as a young woman myself. I see so much of that kind of ingenuity and that like vivacious attitude that she must have had. I feel like I've learned so much about her.
She was literally on the cutting edge, wasn't she, for her time? It's impossible. The pun is intended.
Yeah, I was going to say no pun intended or pun intended there.
The pun might be intended.
But certainly, you know, working in stone that is no small feat.
No, it was
that
not.
takes a lot of effort to do
Particularly at the time.
It does. And James, you know, to talk more about the art in a little bit, but the credit card offer that we have right now.
Well, now there's no better time to get really fully to make these connections with this foundational figure in Louisiana art and history and support LPB at the same time. Here is the way to do that today. There is a special credit card offer. First credit card pledge of $1,500 during the program receives a set of 2 limited edition prints of Angela Gregory's original sketches. These are sketches made in preparation for that bronze sculpture, Plantation Madonna. And the prints are authorized and reproduced from Gregory's original by the trustee of her estate. You would also get, with that, a private curator-led tour of the exhibit, Angela Gregory, Doyenne of Louisiana Sculpture, at the West Baton Rouge Museum, and a one-night stay for 2 at the Watermark Baton Rouge, and a $100 gift certificate to dine at the Gregory, which you would do surrounded by those original Gregory bas-reliefs. So no better way to get to know this artist, get really familiar with the work, and also to support LPB's wonderful programming.
Yes, this is just a win-win all the way around when you think about the ways that you can support LPB. Right. And also, Chelsea, we've got the member challenge going on right now. And this is a really special member challenge. Unlike others that we've done before, this one's especially special, I'll say.
You're so right. So Frank and Kathy MacArthur of Baton Rouge are proud to support LPB's Louisiana Production Fund, and we're challenging all viewers to donate tonight, and we'll match dollar for dollar. Frank and Kathy MacArthur will up to $5,000 called in during this program only. In effect, this will make your donation worth twice as much to LPB and will help us produce more programs and documentaries that celebrate Louisiana's food, of course the art, music, scenery, cultures, and traditions, all the things that you love and all the things that make our state a treasure. Pledge now to become a founding member of LPB's Louisiana Production Fund.
And this Louisiana Production Fund, I've just got to tell you, it's so special because of Beth Courtney. It was the work that Beth Courtney did in really being Louisiana's storyteller and really taking LPB to that place of telling Louisiana stories that we want to honor her this way. So I want to encourage everyone, please give and call. This is the time to do it as a member of LPB or to become a friend of LPB. Now's the time to do it during our member challenge break, where we're matching this support for LPB and for Beth Courtney and the work that she did and all that she represents here for Louisiana Public Broadcasting. So
we all follow in her footsteps very much.
We
very
do.
Proud to have a small role to play in telling these stories.
Some very large footsteps, I got to tell you.
Big shoes to fill.
Got to tell you for that, indeed. So hey, we're going to take a moment and look at those thank you gifts one more time. So when you call your pledge of support at 888-769-5000, or of course you can do the QR code, whatever way you choose to give. We've got some amazing thank you gifts, and here they are.
For $15 a month, receive the Angela Gregory combo, including a DVD of the program you are watching, Angela Gregory, A Legacy Chiseled in Stone. The hardcover book, A Dream and a Chisel, Louisiana Sculptor Angela Gregory in Paris, signed by author Nancy Penrose, plus the book Newcomb Pottery, a visual treasury book. For $10 a month, receive the book A Dream and a Chisel, Louisiana Sculptor Angela Gregory in Paris, signed by Nancy Penrose. Or for just $6 a month, receive a DVD of the program you are watching, Angela Gregory, A Legacy Chiseled in Stone. In addition to these wonderful gifts, you'll receive Visions, LPB's monthly program guide, Louisiana Life magazine, and our popular member benefit, LPB Passport.
So, Chelsea, I want to talk a bit about, Angela Gregory being in Paris and her return to Louisiana, and just the notion that a young woman in Paris in the 30s coming back and doing all the things that she did.
Still, again, just one of the most amazing stories. So, young woman walking the streets of Paris, knocks on the door of Bourdelle, the technician of Rodin, who we all have known and heard of with The Thinker, and knocks on the door, wants a 30-minute appointment, ends up with a 2-year apprenticeship before coming back to Louisiana. Really incredible. Really incredible. And her life, the trajectory of her life just takes off from there in terms of the work that she did here in Louisiana and all the pieces that we get a chance to see. And speaking of those pieces, the credit card offer is in place.
Absolutely.
That will give you some really great access to all of her work.
This is how to make the very most of putting all these pieces together and tying that past to the present and to the future of where art and architecture really unite here in Louisiana.
Indeed.
So for a credit card pledge of $1,500, the first credit card pledge will receive those 2 limited edition prints of Angela Gregory's original sketches made in preparation for her bronze sculpture Plantation Madonna. This is a set of prints which is authorized and was reproduced from the originals by a trustee of the Gregory estate. You'll also get an after-hours curator-led tour of the West Baton Rouge's exhibit, Angela Gregory, Doyen of Louisiana Sculpture.
That is so exciting. I mean, talk about something that you don't ever get to do. Who gets the private tour of the museum?
Exactly. And if you haven't been there for over to Port Allen to see that museum, do, because it's a true Louisiana treasure. You'll also get a one-night stay at the Watermark Baton Rouge, plus a $100 gift certificate to dine in the Gregory right in the shadow of those wonderful sculptures. So never a better chance than that.
That's right. Call us with your pledge of support and we'll be back. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're sitting in the Watermark Hotel that was formerly a bank building. In 1949, Baton Rouge has experienced an extreme amount of growth. This bank needed more space to meet with customers and to respond to those needs. In 1940, the census of Baton Rouge was 35,000. In 1950, the census of Baton Rouge was 135,000. It was the largest population growth of a city, certainly in Louisiana and in most of the United States. An architect whose specialty was working with banks as people came back from the war, and the GI Bill gave them the opportunity to be doing so many new things. He worked with banks. He lived in New Orleans. He called Angela and said, "Angela, I've got a problem. Can you help me with it?" They want to turn some mezzanine space, just an overlook onto the floor of where the tellers were. Can we turn that into workable space? This bank is looking at expanding and changing in 1949. So she presents miniatures of these pieces that would then tell the history of banking in Louisiana and what it did, how transportation changed, how mechanization changed things, and that's how this was done. When you look at these pieces and you realize, was she here creating this? Not exactly. In her own studio, she created these large panels. Each of them is actually 3 smaller ones, done in a medium, so stone was added in making this that she was going to carve from. She actually created the base of these, and then that was covered then with a malleable kind of stone pieces, sometimes even oyster shells, were added by Architectural Stone in New Orleans to her specifications of working with a plaster and add whatever it was going to be. Put together then, all they were reliefs with no paint on it. They were loaded onto flatbed trucks and delivered here to the bank and then installed. She then, living at the Capitol House there on the river, she had brought her mother with her, and so her mother was doing painting while she was doing this. She then went on to create each one of these pieces and to paint the detail of it. Perhaps the piece that hundreds, if not thousands, of Louisianians have actually touched is the railing around the relief map on the first floor of the state capitol. Why was that railing put there? It was not added until 1949, during the same time she's working on the bank. It's because the Louisiana State Capitol is the most visited state capitol in the country, and because so many Louisianians physically worked in building that capitol in 14 months, it was wearing away the relief map of the parishes, showing what was important from what they grew that was there. So the architect said, Angela, can you create a railing? She brings her mother with her here to Baton Rouge. They live at the Capitol House Hotel for the months it took to complete it. And then she took her mother to Paris with her, and her mother did die in Paris while Angela was there. So there was an entire group of women who were connected with the beginning of the West Baton Rouge Museum in Port Allen, and Port Allen is named after Henry Watkins Allen, who had been a mayor and then a governor. He was a landowner there in Port Allen. When Angela then did the research in order to do Henry Watkins Allen, her statue of him is quite different from the statue of Allen that stands as an erect piece of marble or stone on the first floor of the state capitol. He is seated, he is leaning, and in the dedication and in the way in which she explained why he is shown that way, it is to show the effect of war on a human being, on a physical body. From the mid-50s to probably the mid-70s, right up to about 1980, she knew that her body was not going to take the physical work to continue to create the kind of sculpture of large pieces. She had such a name for herself in New Orleans. She was approached by Dominican College, which was walking distance from her house. She was then hired by Dominican College to teach.
Angela Gregory was in her 70s when she was on the faculty at Dominican College. She was just as excited about work she had done in her 50s and 40s and communicated that joy to her students. I took a couple of sculpture classes. I took a portrait class. I carved stone under her direction. Primarily it was modeling in clay. Our first class was to do a portrait bust. And so I got to handle all the traditional tools in terms of the molds, plaster piece molds, which aren't made anymore because of the advent of rubber and all the other more modern materials. But I learned a lot of the classical techniques and practices from Miss Gregory, because she studied with Antoine Bourdelle. The enthusiasm that she had for her career was so great that I guess some of that filtered down to me. The stone carving, she had several pieces of stone that the students could work on. And so I got to learn basically modeling and carving, which are the two traditional types of sculpture. And I loved both of them.
Angela is one of the most important early artists of the 20th century, particularly if you look at Louisiana artists and narrow the field down again to women artists. In the 1920s and 30s, when Angela started out, there were very few women who were given recognition for their work as artists. And she paved the way for Lynn Emery, Ida Kohlmeyer, Linda Benglis, Clyde Connell, even Frank Hayden, who was very important to Baton Rouge. Angela worked throughout her life in her studio on Pine Street, and many artists, including Frank Hayden, would come to visit her and take inspiration from her and encouragement.
Angela's legacy lives in stone, in plaster, and bronze, and in the hearts and minds and lives of those people that she touched and who touched her. On her 80th birthday, she and her friend Joseph Campbell exchanged 80th birthday cards. Campbell wrote back to Angela and said this: "Do our experiences become more marvelous with age? Or is it just that as we age, we understand how important they are?" To look at her young image right there on the wall of what she did in her 20s, what she continued to do as a leader and as someone who knew she was gifted and was responsible for the gifts that she was given and the life that she had in New Orleans and throughout Louisiana and known across the world.
Hello and welcome back. I'm Robin Merrick, supporter and friend of LPB. I hope you've enjoyed Angela Gregory, A Legacy Chiseled in Stone. This is the last break to show your support for original LPB documentaries such as this. We rely on viewer support to produce the stories about Louisiana that you tell us you love so much. Please call us now at 888-769-5000 or text GIVE to that same number. Make your pledge online at lpb.org or scan that QR code that you see on your screen with your smartphone camera. If you are already a member, please consider making an additional one-time contribution to take advantage of the offers we have for you right now, including a member challenge from Frank and Kathy MacArthur of Baton Rouge, who will match your generous donation in support of LPB's Louisiana Production Fund. We also have very special thank you gifts for you, so let's take another look at those gifts right now.
For $15 a month, receive the Angela Gregory combo, including a DVD of the program you are watching, Angela Gregory, A Legacy Chiseled in Stone. The hardcover book, A Dream and a Chisel, Louisiana sculptor Angela Gregory in Paris, signed by author Nancy Penrose, plus the book Newcomb Pottery, a visual treasury book. For $10 a month, receive the book A Dream and a Chisel, Louisiana sculptor Angela Gregory in Paris, signed by Nancy Penrose. Or for just $6 a month, receive a DVD of the program you are watching, Angela Gregory, A Legacy Chiseled in Stone. In addition to these wonderful gifts, you'll receive Visions, LPB's monthly program guide, Louisiana Life magazine, and our popular member benefit, LPB Passport.
And our special guests are back once again, James Fox Smith with Country Roads Magazine and Chelsea Norris, co-director at Ann Connolly Fine Art right here in Baton Rouge. Guys, glad to have you back again. We have so enjoyed this program, and it's just so much that we could talk about, but we certainly want to thank all of those who were involved in producing what we've been watching so far. So Dorothy Kendrick, thank you as producer here at LPB, and Kirk Robertson for the work that you've done as well on this. It's amazing, and all the others that were a part of it.
Oh man, Susan Hymel, I mean, without that just encyclopedic catalog of knowledge in her mind, I mean, her stories that she shares from her connection to that estate are just amazing.
She's really, Susan has given years and years of her life to uncovering and tying together all the pieces of Angela's story, hasn't she?
For sure. And then Elizabeth Chubbuck Weinstein could not be left out either. Amazing curatorial eye, great storyteller as well.
Terrific writer. She's,
oh my gosh,
she did a fabulous piece in Country Roads that ran in the July issue this year, and I learned so many things about Angela that we didn't know before.
That's right, so much. And so again, Dorothy and Kirk, thank you for all that you did to pull this together. And all this is made possible because we can do it right here, telling Louisiana stories by Louisiana folks right here in the studios of LPB, putting it all together. So thanks for that. But speaking of that, the credit card offer.
Yes.
We've got to say it. Guys, this is sort of a last chance on this credit card offer.
When it comes to tying things all together, this is really the way to make the best and really make it count. This is a special $1,500 pledge. For a $1,500 pledge this evening, you receive a set of 2 limited edition prints of Angela Gregory's original sketches. These are not, these are actually the sketches that she made in preparation for that bronze sculpture, Plantation Madonna. There's also an after-hours private curator-led tour of that exhibit, which is currently at the West Baton Rouge Museum, another Louisiana treasure in Port Allen, right there on the riverside, as well as you'll also get to see the other exhibitions that are on display. And at Chelsea, you were saying, I mean, the collection of African art that is in that collection is also world class, isn't it?
So worth the trip. Right. I mean, just an amazing curatorial eye, such a unique voice for our community. I mean, I really could not think of a better way to make this offer even better, right?
Exactly right.
And then I think you're going to spend some time at the Watermark, so you get to have up close view, because Angela did so many things on the exterior of buildings, but for her to have something inside is actually pretty unique, and then you get to dine under it.
Dine beneath it. I mean, there is a way of tying it all together. In a way that you just, that opportunity just doesn't come along that long.
And this is for the first credit card offer. I've got to remind everyone, first credit card offer, $1,500 or more, you can receive all of this. So that's how it works. And of course, we've got the member challenge, Chelsea. We don't want to leave that out. There's awesome member challenge that we have that doubles your support to LPB during this break.
Frank and Kathy MacArthur of Baton Rouge are proud to support LPB's Louisiana Production Fund and are challenging all viewers to donate tonight. This is your last chance, and they'll match every dollar for dollar up to $5,000 called in during this program only. In effect, this will make your donation worth twice as much to LPB and will help us produce more documentary series that celebrate Louisiana food, of course, art, music, scenery, cultures, and traditions, all the things that make our state a treasure. Pledge now to become a founding member of Louisiana Production Fund from LPB.
And so I just have to underscore that this Louisiana Production Fund is brought about on the retirement of Beth Courtney, who was a longtime president and CEO here at LPB, and she was really leading the charge to tell the Louisiana story. And many of these stories got carried on beyond Louisiana, so we're excited about that the whole nation gets to see the work that we're doing here in Louisiana.
You're quite right, isn't it?
Yes.
Right, and there are some gifts that come along with this too, aren't there?
And we've got them right here. Here are your thank you gifts.
For $15 a month, receive the Angela Gregory combo, including a DVD of the program you are watching, Angela Gregory, A Legacy Chiseled in Stone. The hardcover book, A Dream and a Chisel, Louisiana sculptor Angela Gregory in Paris, signed by author Nancy Penrose, plus the book Newcomb Pottery, a visual treasury book. For $10 a month, receive the book A Dream and a Chisel, Louisiana sculptor Angela Gregory in Paris, signed by Nancy Penrose. Or for just $6 a month, receive a DVD of the program you are watching, Angela Gregory, A Legacy Chiseled in Stone. In addition to these wonderful gifts, you'll receive Visions, LPB's monthly program guide, Louisiana Life magazine, and our popular member benefit, LPB Passport.
Chelsea, tell us more about all of the art that we can see of Miss Gregory's work around town, around here in Baton Rouge, and even across the state.
The Watermark's kind of an amazing example of bringing it not only from its previous context with Louisiana National Bank being the first skyscraper in Baton Rouge, going up and hiring this young, budding female artist working in stone to do this amazing story of bas-relief on the ceiling. So that's where it's talking about Louisiana culture, commerce, and industry, all the pillars that we still hold up today. So coming in as the art consultants, we were super privileged to not only restore what was there with the talent of Elise Grenier, but then after that, build upon it. You know, we have the Gregory part of the restaurant, right, inside of the Watermark, and I think there's a great opportunity there for some of our viewers to take a taste at the right amount. So we definitely love that engagement, and then we love bringing it into the 21st century. So just an amazing story.
That is so incredible of Angela's work that we're getting a chance to experience and learn about for the first time. And so the credit card offer. And
donate to LPB at exactly the same
help
time.
LPB all at the same time.
Yeah.
And so James, talking more about the credit card offer, I don't want to leave that on the table for
Sure,
so many reasons. Yeah, for so many reasons.
Well, I mean, Louisiana is a place where you can get this close to magnificent works of art, and here's a way you can do it while supporting LPB at the same time.
Yes.
This special offer for the first credit card pledge of $1,500, you will receive a set of 2 limited edition prints of Angela Gregory's original sketches made in preparation for her bronze sculpture Plantation Madonna. You'll also get an after-hours private curator-led tour for up to 10 guests of the exhibit Angela Gregory, Doyenne of Louisiana Sculpture, which is currently on view at the West Baton Rouge Museum, and that one-night stay for 2 at the Watermark Hotel, where you will dine in the Gregory, that restaurant directly surrounded by all of Gregory's sculptures. So it's an amazing way to be introduced not only to the work in its real context, but also to show some of the legacy of the impact she left on the city.
No question. And you can only get those kinds of stories right here at LPB.
Well, LPB.
I mean, we have gone all our lives not knowing of all of this. So thank you to LPB and thank you to you all for being here. And we're going to go back to our program right now.
The Gregory, located inside the historic Watermark Baton Rouge Hotel, is honored to support Angela Gregory, a legacy chiseled in stone. Lunch or dinner dining is available daily among murals sculpted by Angela Gregory in the 1940s.